If one day, a horseman entered your territory with a gaze that seemed to want to devour everything, what would you do? Are you curious about the intention behind that gaze? Come on, let's go and find out the truth behind the deadly gaze in the story. I never thought a single cup of water could change a man's life, not like this. My name is Elias Thornton, and 6 months ago, I was just a rancher, carving out a living on the edge of the New Mexico territory, where the sun scorches the earth and the wind carries whispers of trouble. My days were simple, mending fences, tending cattle, watching the horizon for storms or rustlers. I liked it that way, quiet, predictable, just me, my horse, and the endless stretch of sagebrush and red dirt. But that all changed the day I found him, Cale, a Navajo warrior, half dead by my well, his blood soaking the cracked earth like a sacrifice to some forgotten god. Hey there. Before we dive into this epic story, smash that like button if you're ready for some Wild West drama. Drop a 1 in the comments if you're rooting for Elias, and subscribe to join the adventure. Stick around till the end for a jaw-dropping twist you won't see coming. Share this with your friends if you love a good tale of honor and courage. Let's get started. It was late summer, the kind of heat that makes your skin feel like it's peeling off. I was checking the fence line near the creek when I saw him slumped against the well's stone wall, his breath ragged, his eyes glassy with pain. His tunic was torn, stained with blood from a gash across his side, a knife wound, deep and ugly. I didn't think twice. I dropped my tools, hauled him into the shade, and poured water from my canteen into his cracked lips. He drank like a man who'd forgotten what water tasted like. I bandaged him as best I could, using strips of my own shirt, and sat with him until his fever broke. I didn't know his name then. Didn't know he was a Navajo diplomat, a man carrying the weight of peace talks between his people and the US government. All I saw was a man who needed help. That's how it started, with a cup of water and a choice to do what was right. He stayed with me for 3 days, recovering in the spare room of my cabin. His name was Cale, and he spoke softly, his English careful but clear. He told me about his mission, about the fragile truce his people had forged with the settlers, about the hope he carried for a future where his children wouldn't know war. I listened, mostly silent, because what does a rancher say to a man like that? I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a peacemaker. I was just Elias, a man who'd seen enough of the world to know it was hard and cruel, but maybe not so cruel that a stranger couldn't be saved. When Cale left, he clasped my hand and called me brother. He said his people would remember what I'd done. I didn't think much of it at the time, just words, I figured, the kind men say when they're grateful. But 2 weeks later, a group of Navajo elders rode to my ranch. They came with no warning, their horses kicking up dust under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Their leader, an old man named Tahoma, dismounted and handed me a spear. Not just any spear. A Navajo war lance, its shaft carved with symbols I couldn't read, its tip gleaming like it had been forged in starlight. Eagle feathers hung from it, swaying in the breeze. Tahoma's eyes were sharp, like they could see straight through me. "You gave water to a dying man," he said. "You gave us hope. This lance is yours, Kind Heart. You are one of us now." Kind Heart. That's what they called me, the only white man in the territory to carry Navajo honor. I stood there, holding that lance, feeling its weight, not just in my hands, but in my soul. Pride swelled in my chest, but so did something else. Fear. Because out here, in this land of blood and promises, honor comes with a price. I didn't know it then, but that price was coming for me, and it was coming fast. 6 months passed. 6 months of peace, fragile as a spider's web. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to live with one eye on the horizon, waiting for trouble, almost. But peace is a liar in the territory. It lulls you, makes you soft, makes you forget how quickly everything can turn to ash. I learned that lesson the hard way, on a morning that started like any other. I was out by the creek, hammering new posts into the fence line, the sun already beating down like a fist. My rifle leaned against a nearby rock, close enough to grab if coyotes or rustlers showed up. The war lance was back at the cabin, propped against the porch where I'd been cleaning its feathers that morning. I'd taken to keeping it there, a reminder of the day I became something more than just a rancher. That's when I saw it. A dust cloud rising from the eastern ridge, moving fast. 5 riders, their horses lathered with sweat, tearing across my land like they owned it. I squinted against the glare, my heart kicking up a notch. They weren't neighbors, Neighbors don't ride like that, with spurs digging into their mounts' flanks, with the kind of urgency that smells like violence. I dropped my hammer, my hand drifting toward the rifle. The war lance flashed in my mind, its eagle feathers catching the light, a symbol of the trust I'd been given. But those riders weren't coming to talk about trust. They reined up 20 feet from where I stood, their horses snorting, their eyes hard. The leader was a tall man, lean as a whip, with pale eyes that looked like they'd seen too many bad things and liked them. His name, I'd learned soon enough, was Gideon Blackwood. But it wasn't his face that stopped my heart. It was what he held across his saddle, a Navajo necklace, its turquoise beads stained with fresh blood, dripping onto the dirt like tears. My stomach twisted. I knew that necklace. Cale wore it always, a gift from his mother, a piece of his soul. Gideon's lips curled into a smile, the kind that makes you want to check your back for a knife. "You, Elias Thornton?" he asked, his voice low, like he already knew the answer. I straightened, my hand resting on the rifle's stock. "Depends who's asking." His smile widened, showing teeth yellowed by tobacco. "Name's Gideon Blackwood. My brother was Captain Amos Blackwood. And this," he held up the bloodied necklace, letting it dangle like a noose. "This belongs to your Navajo friend, the one who got my brother killed." The world tilted under my feet. Kyle had ridden out 4 days ago, headed south for peace talks with the Navajo and the government. He was supposed to be safe, guarded by federal escorts. But that necklace told a different story, one written in blood and betrayal. My mouth went dry, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "Where is he?" Gideon's eyes glittered like a snake sizing up its prey. "Somewhere you'll never find him, unless you're willing to make a trade." I heard the click of 5 weapons cocking at once, the sound sharp enough to cut through the morning air. My rifle felt heavy, useless against 5 guns trained on me. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what was happening. Captain Amos Blackwood, a name I'd heard in town, whispered in saloons and trading posts. A corrupt officer, exposed by Kyle's testimony 6 months ago, stripped of his rank and dead by his own hand before the trial could finish. The official story was that he'd been skimming profits from arms deals, selling weapons to both sides of the Navajo conflicts. Kyle's words had brought him down, and I'd stood by him, vouching for the truth. Now it seemed the past had come to collect its due. "What kind of trade?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Gideon dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he stepped closer. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag, holding it like it was a loaded gun. "A confession," he said. "Already written, just needs your signature. Says you lied about my brother, says you and that Navajo conspired to frame an innocent man, says everything you built this peace on was a lie." My blood ran cold. I could see the trap now, clear as day. Sign the paper, and I'd destroy everything Cale and I had fought for. The peace between the settlers and the Navajo would collapse. The territory would burn again, and I'd be branded a traitor, facing a noose for treason. Refuse, and Cale would die, his blood on my hands. I looked at the necklace in Gideon's grip, the beads glinting in the sunlight, and felt my heart hammer against my ribs. How do I know he's even alive? One of Gideon's men, a squat killer with a scar like a lightning bolt across his face, reached into his coat. He tossed something at my feet. A leather cord with 3 Navajo prayer beads, the same ones Cale wore around his neck. "He was alive when we took this," the man said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Whether he stays that way depends on you." "Hold up, things are heating up in Dead Man's Gorge, and you won't believe what happens next. Drop A in the comments if you're gripped by this showdown. Keep watching for a twist that'll blow your mind, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay locked in for more epic moments. I stared at the beads, my mind flashing back to the last time I saw Cale. He'd been hopeful, his eyes bright with talk of extending the peace treaty. He'd gripped my hand, called me brother, promised to return with good news. Now he was in the hands of killers, bleeding, maybe dying, while I stood here with a rifle I couldn't use and a choice I didn't want to make. "You got 1 hour, Gideon said, swinging back into his saddle. "Meet us at Dead Man's Gorge. Come alone. Bring the signed confession, and your friend lives to see another day. Try anything else, and we'll send you his scalp piece by piece." They rode off, leaving me in a cloud of dust and dread. The war lance was still on my porch, its feathers trembling in the breeze. I thought of Tahoma's words about how the greatest warriors win without fighting. But this wasn't a fight I could avoid. This was a reckoning. I saddled my horse, strapped the lance to my side, and rode hard for town, my mind racing faster than my mare's hooves. Dead Man's Gorge was a killing ground, narrow, walled in by cliffs, no way out. Gideon wasn't planning a trade, he was planning an execution. But I had one thing he didn't know about: the Navajo signal system I'd learned during my time with Kyle people. If I could get word to them, if I could reach the right man in town, maybe I could turn this trap into something else. Maybe I could save Kale. Maybe I could save us all. But as I rode, the weight of that lance pressed against my leg, and I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened at Dead Man's Gorge, it would test everything I was: rancher, brother, warrior, and it would decide whether the peace we'd built could survive the sins of men like Gideon Blackwood. I gripped the reins tighter, the horizon blurring as I pushed my horse harder. Time was running out, and I was riding straight into hell with nothing but a spear, a prayer, and a desperate hope that kindness could still outweigh hate. The dust from Gideon Blackwood's riders hadn't even settled when I swung into the saddle, my heart pounding like a war drum. The Navajo war lance, strapped to my mare's side, felt heavier than it ever had, its eagle feathers trembling as if they sensed the storm coming. Kyle was out there, somewhere, his life hanging by a thread, and I was the only one who could pull him back from the edge. Gideon's words echoed in my head. 1 hour. Dead Man's Gorge. Come alone. A trap, plain as day, but what choice did I have? I'd given Kyle water when he was dying, called him brother when he called me the same. I couldn't turn my back on him now, not when his blood was on that necklace, dripping like a warning of what was to come. I spurred my horse toward town, the wind whipping my face, the sun climbing higher in a sky too clear for the darkness I felt inside. My ranch was 10 miles from Silver Creek, the nearest settlement, a cluster of saloons, a trading post, and a sheriff's office that barely kept the peace. I had to find Amos Reed, the sheriff who'd stood by me 6 months ago when Kyle's testimony brought down Captain Amos Blackwood. If anyone could help, it was him. But time was a noose tightening around my neck, and every second I spent riding was a second Kyle might not have. The necklace Gideon held up kept flashing in my mind, turquoise beads, blood-soaked, glinting in the morning light. Kyle had worn it every day, a gift from his mother, a piece of his soul. I'd seen him touch it absently when he spoke of peace, of his hope for a world where his people could live without fear. Now it was in the hands of a man whose pale eyes burned with hate, a man who'd lost his brother and blamed me for it. Gideon Blackwood wasn't just after revenge. He was after something bigger, something that could tear apart the fragile truce we'd built. I could feel it, like a storm gathering on the horizon, dark and unstoppable. As I rode, my mind churned through the past 6 months. Kyle's testimony had exposed Captain Blackwood's corruption, selling guns to outlaws, skimming profits from deals that armed both settlers and Navajo, keeping the territory bleeding for his own gain. I'd stood by Kyle, vouched for him in court, because I'd seen the truth in his eyes. Blackwood's men had tried to kill him to keep him quiet, and I'd been there, rifle in hand, when they came for him. We'd won that fight, but it cost us. Blackwood took his own life before the trial ended, leaving a stain of shame on his name. Now his brother Gideon was here, picking up the pieces, and I was the one he wanted to break. The town came into view, a scattering of wooden buildings baking under the sun. Silver Creek was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a fight. I reined up outside the sheriff's office, my horse panting, my shirt soaked with sweat. Amos Reed was inside, hunched over a desk littered with wanted posters, his badge glinting on his vest. He was younger than most sheriffs, barely 30, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much. When he saw me, he stood, his hand halfway to his gun before he recognized my face. "Elias," he said, frowning, "what's got you riding in like the devil's on your tail?" I didn't waste words. "They've got Kale, Gideon Blackwood, and 4 men. They're holding him at Dead Man's Gorge. They want me to sign a confession saying I lied about his brother, that Kale and I framed an innocent man. If I don't, they'll kill him." Amos's face went pale, his jaw tightening. "Blackwood's brother? Hell, Elias, I thought that mess was over." "So did I said, my voice rough with the fear I couldn't shake. They've got an hour deadline. I need you to get a message to the Navajo, Tahoma's people. They'll know what to do." Amos's hand hovered over his revolver like he was itching to ride out right then. "I'll round up a posse, get the boys from Fort Stockton." "No," I cut him off. "They see anyone else coming, Kale's dead before we get close. I've got a plan, but I need you to trust me." I pulled a scrap of paper from my pocket, scribbling a message as fast as my shaking hands would let me. "To Tahoma, from Kind Heart. Enemies have taken the peace speaker. Move fast to Dead Man's Gorge. Prevent war." I folded it and pressed it into Amos's hand. "Take this to Javier Lopez at the trading post. He'll get it to the Navajo. Tell him it's from Kind Heart. He'll understand." Amos nodded, his eyes searching mine. "And you? You're not going to that gorge alone, are you?" "I have to," I said, checking the chambers of my Colt revolver. "They said come alone, and I'm not risking Kale's life on a gamble." "Elias, that's suicide," Amos said, his voice low, urgent. 5 against 1 in a place like that? You'll be cut down before you draw." "Maybe," I said, swinging back into the saddle. "But Kyle risked everything for peace. I owe him the same." As I rode out of town, the war lance bounced against my leg, its weight a reminder of the trust Tahoma had placed in me. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was Kind Heart, a man caught between two worlds, carrying the hopes of both. Dead Man's Gorge was a death trap, narrow, with cliffs that loomed like the jaws of some ancient beast. Gideon wasn't planning a trade, he was planning a slaughter. But I'd learned something in my time with the Navajo, something Gideon didn't know. Their signal system, smoke, mirrors, the beat of a drum, could summon warriors faster than any telegraph. If Javier got my message to Tahoma, if the Navajo moved fast enough, I might have a chance to turn this trap around. The ride to the gorge was a blur, my mind racing with every hoofbeat. I thought of Kyle bleeding somewhere, his hope for peace hanging by a thread. I thought of the lance, of Tahoma's words about winning without fighting. But most of all, I thought of that cup of water, the moment that changed everything. I'd given it without expecting anything in return, but now it was pulling me into a fight I couldn't walk away from. Gideon Blackwood wanted my signature, my honor, my life. He wouldn't get them, not without a fight. As the gorge loomed ahead, its red cliffs glowing in the midday sun, I felt the weight of the lance, the weight of the choice I was about to make. I was one man, one rancher, against 5 killers, but I wasn't alone. Not really. The Navajo had called me brother, and brothers don't let each other die. The mouth of Dead Man's Gorge yawned before me, a scar in the earth where the cliffs rose like sentinels, red and unyielding under the merciless sun. My horse snorted, sensing the danger as I slowed her to a walk. The war lance was in my hand now, its shaft warm from my grip, its eagle feathers catching the faint breeze. I could feel my pulse hammering, my mouth dry as the dust under my boots. Gideon Blackwood was waiting, and so was Kale's fate. I'd ridden hard from Silver Creek, my message to the Navajo entrusted to Amos and Javier. Now it was just me, the gorge, and a plan that felt more like a prayer than a strategy. The silence was wrong. No birds, no wind, just the hollow echo of my horse's hooves on stone. Dead Man's Gorge earned its name for a reason. Narrow, with walls so steep they blocked out half the sky. It was a place where men came to die. I'd heard stories, outlaws ambushed, travelers trapped, their bones left to bleach in the sun. Gideon had chosen it for a reason. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to bury me, to bury Kyle, to bury the peace we'd fought for. But I wasn't walking in blind. The Navajo had taught me their ways, signals, tracks, the art of seeing without being seen. If I could hold Gideon's attention, keep him talking, maybe Tahoma's warriors would come. Maybe. I dismounted, tying my horse to a scrubby mesquite tree at the gorge's entrance. My Colt was holstered at my hip, loaded and ready, but it was the lance I held tight. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol, a promise. Tahoma had given it to me, called me Kind Heart. I couldn't let that trust be for nothing. I stepped into the gorge, the cliffs closing in around me, the air thick with the smell of dust and danger. Gideon's voice echoed before I saw him, sharp and cold as a blade. "Right on time, Thornton. I was starting to think you didn't care about your Navajo friend." He stood on a ledge 20 feet up, his rifle trained on me, his pale eyes glinting like ice. Below, 3 of his men crouched behind boulders, their guns drawn, blocking the only way out. The 4th man was out of sight, probably guarding Kael. I scanned the cliffs, searching for movement, for any sign of Tahoma's warriors. Nothing, just stone and shadow. My heart sank, but I kept my face steady. "Where's Kael?" I called, my voice echoing off the walls. "Safe," Gideon said, his smile twisting like a snake. "For now. You got the confession?" I reached into my coat, pulling out a folded paper. Not the confession he wanted, but a letter I'd scribbled in town. It told the truth, who Gideon was, what he was doing, how he'd kidnapped a Navajo diplomat to force a lie. I'd given copies to Amos and Javier, one for the governor, one for the Navajo. If I died here, the truth would live. I held the paper up, letting it catch the light. "Show me Kael first." Gideon nodded to someone I couldn't see. A moment later, the 4th man appeared on the opposite ledge, dragging a figure into view. Kael. His hands were bound, his face bloodied, his body slumped like he was barely holding on. But his eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the same fire I'd seen 6 months ago, when he'd spoken of peace. He was alive. That was enough to keep me going. "Satisfied?" Gideon asked, his voice mocking. "Toss up that confession, and we can end this like civilized men." I didn't move. My mind was racing, calculating. The Navajo signals, smoke, flashes of light, the beat of a drum. I'd sent the message, but an hour wasn't much time. If Tahoma's warriors were coming, they'd need a sign. I gripped the lance tighter, its weight grounding me. I had to stall, had to keep Gideon talking until help arrived, or until I could find a way to get Kael out. Before I could speak, a new voice cut through the gorge, sharp and steady. "Or you can drop your weapons and surrender." I froze. Amos Reed stood at the gorge's entrance, his badge glinting, his rifle aimed at Gideon's men. Damn it, Amos. I told him to stay back, to get the message to the Navajo, not to follow me. His presence was a spark in a powder keg. Gideon's face twisted with rage. "I told you to come alone, Thornton." "He did," Amos called back. "I came on my own, got tired of scum like you, thinking you can run roughshod over my town." I wanted to curse him, to tell him to get out, but it was too late. The air crackled with tension, every gun in the gorge shifting, waiting for the first shot. Kael's captor tightened his grip, a knife glinting at Kael's throat. Gideon raised his rifle, his eyes burning. "You just killed them both, Sheriff." That's when it happened. An arrow sliced through the air, striking the stock of Gideon's rifle, splintering it. Another hit the man holding Kael, pinning his shoulder to the cliff. He screamed, dropping the knife, and Kael slumped free. Navajo warriors appeared on the rim, 6 of them, silent as ghosts, their bows drawn, their eyes locked on Gideon's men. Tahoma's voice rolled through the gorge, deep and unyielding. "Gideon Blackwood, you have broken the peace by attacking a Navajo diplomat. Surrender, or face our justice." Gideon's men hesitated, their guns wavering. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. The Navajo had turned the trap into a cage, but Gideon wasn't done. His face twisted, his hand reaching for a pistol hidden in his boot. "You think this is over?" he screamed, his voice raw with hate. "My brother was worth 10 of your savage friends." The gorge exploded into chaos. One of Gideon's men fired at the Navajo, and an arrow answered, dropping him where he stood. Kael's captor drew a second knife, raising it toward Kael's chest. I didn't think, I didn't have time. I hefted the war lance, its balance perfect, its weight an extension of my will. I threw it with everything I had, the eagle feathers streaming behind it, the iron tip flashing. It struck the man square in the chest, pinning him to the cliff. He gasped, his knife falling, his body sliding to the ground. Gideon's pistol swung toward me, his eyes wild. "You bastard!" he roared. But before he could fire, Amos's rifle cracked. Gideon staggered, blood blooming on his chest, and fell from the ledge, his body hitting the stone below with a sickening thud. Silence fell, heavy as a shroud. The remaining 2 gunmen dropped their weapons, their hands raised, their faces pale with fear. I ran to Kael, cutting his bonds with my knife. He was weak, blood matting his hair, but he managed a faint smile. "Kind heart," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came." "Always," I said, helping him to his feet. The Navajo warriors descended, securing the prisoners. In the distance, I heard hoofbeats. Federal patrol, not Navajo ponies. Amos had sent word to Fort Stockton before following me. Gideon's plan was crumbling, but I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The truth had to come out, and I had to make sure it did. The air in Dead Man's Gorge was thick with the smell of blood and gunpowder, the silence after the fight heavier than the cliffs around us. Kyle leaned against me, his breath shallow, his weight a reminder of how close I'd come to losing him. The Navajo warriors moved with quiet precision, binding Gideon's surviving men, their faces unreadable, but their eyes sharp with purpose. Amos Reed stood at the gorge's entrance, his rifle still smoking, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight. The Federal Patrol's hoofbeats grew louder, a rumble that promised order, but also questions. I held the war lance, pulled free from the man I'd killed, its shaft unmarked, ready for another fight if it came to that. But God, how I hoped it wouldn't. I looked at Kyle, his face bruised, his eyes still carrying that fire I'd seen when he spoke of peace. "You're gonna be okay," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. He nodded, but his gaze flicked to the cliffs, where Tahoma's warriors stood watch. They'd saved us, turned Gideon's trap into our victory, but the cost was written in the blood on the ground. Gideon Blackwood was dead, his plan to restart the Navajo Wars in ashes, but I knew this wasn't just about him. There was something bigger at play, something that made a man like Gideon risk everything for revenge. Amos approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You all right, Elias?" he asked, his voice low, like he was afraid to break the silence. "I will be," I said, helping Kyle sit against a boulder. "You shouldn't have come, Amos. You could have gotten us all killed." He shrugged, a half smile tugging at his lips. "Couldn't let you have all the fun. Besides, I sent word to Fort Stockton before I rode out. Figured we'd need backup." The patrol arrived, a dozen men in blue uniforms, their horses kicking up dust as they filled the gorge. Their captain, a grizzled man named Hawkins, dismounted and surveyed the scene. Gideon's body, the bound gunmen, the Navajo warriors watching from above. His eyes landed on me, then the lance in my hand. "You Thornton?" he asked. I nodded, my grip tightening on the lance. "That's me." He glanced at Kale, then back at me. "Heard you got yourself into a hell of a mess. Care to explain?" I told him everything. Gideon's threat, the bloodied necklace, the confession he wanted me to sign. I told him about the letter I'd written, the copies with Amos and Javier, the truth about Gideon's plan to frame the Navajo and restart the war. Hawkins listened, his face hard, but his eyes thoughtful. When I finished, he nodded to his men. "Take the prisoners, get the wounded to a doctor. We'll sort this out back at the fort." As the patrol moved to secure the gorge, Tahoma descended, his presence commanding even among the soldiers. He spoke in Navajo, his words sharp and deliberate, then switched to English for Hawkins' benefit. "This man, kind heart, saved our peace speaker. He carries our honor. His word is ours." Hawkins raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. He turned to me. "You're lucky, Thornton. Most men don't walk out of a place like this." "Lucky," I said, my voice bitter. "Sure." Kyle gripped my arm, his strength returning. "Not luck," he said. "You chose to fight for what's right. That's why we're here." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd thrown that lance, risked everything, because I couldn't let Kale die. But it wasn't just about him. It was about the peace we'd built, the hope that men like Tahoma and Kale carried, the chance for a world where our children wouldn't know war. I looked at the lance, its feathers stained with dust but unbroken, and felt a weight settle in my chest. This wasn't over. Gideon was dead, but his kind of hate didn't die easy. There were others out there, men who'd profit from blood, who'd see peace as a threat to their wallets. As the patrol led the prisoners away, I helped Kale onto a horse. The Navajo warriors rode with us back to Silver Creek, their presence a quiet reminder of the bond we'd forged. Amos rode beside me, his face grim but proud. "You did good, Elias," he said. "Not many men would have walked into that gorge alone." "Didn't feel like I had a choice," I said, my eyes on the horizon. "Kale's my brother. You don't leave family behind." He nodded, like he understood, though I wondered if anyone could truly know what it felt like to stand in that gorge, to feel the weight of two worlds on your shoulders. When we reached town, Javier Lopez was waiting at the trading post, his face lighting up when he saw Kyle. The message got through, he said, clapping my shoulder. Tahoma's men were already moving when I found them. I managed to smile, but my mind was still in the gorge, replaying every moment. The arrow, the lance, Gideon's final scream. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. There were questions to answer, truths to tell, and a peace to protect. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this was just the beginning. The weeks after Dead Man's Gorge were a blur of dust and questions. The federal patrol took Gideon's men to Fort Stockton, where they'd face trial for kidnapping and attempted murder. Kael recovered slowly, his wounds deep, but his spirit unbroken. I stayed close, helping him heal at my ranch, where the Navajo sent healers and elders to check on their peace speaker. The war lance sat on my porch, a silent reminder of what we'd been through, what we'd saved. But the fight wasn't over. Gideon Blackwood hadn't been alone, and the truth he'd tried to bury was bigger than any of us had imagined. Captain Hawkins came to my ranch one morning, his face lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from digging into men's sins. He sat on my porch, accepting a tin cup of coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon like he expected trouble to ride in any moment. "We found Gideon's records," he said, his voice low. He wasn't working alone. Payments from arms dealers in St. Louis, smugglers in Texas, even a banker in Denver. They wanted the Navajo Wars to start again, Elias. Your friend's kidnapping was just the spark. I set my coffee down, my hands cold despite the autumn warmth. A spark for what? Hawkins leaned forward, his eyes hard. To break the treaties, frame the Navajo for attacking a diplomat, give the army an excuse to push them onto reservations, clear the land for settlers and railroads. If Gideon had succeeded, thousands would have died, and men in high places would have gotten richer. The scope of it hit me like a punch. Gideon wasn't just a grieving brother. He was a pawn in a game played by men who'd never set foot in the territory, who'd never seen the blood they profited from. I thought of Kael, of Tahoma, of the children who'd grow up in a world shaped by those choices. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're tearing it down," Hawkins said. "Every name, every deal, every corrupt bastard who thought they could play God with people's lives. The governor's ordered a full investigation. Amos Reed's been named interim marshal with federal backing. But there's something else." He reached into his coat and pulled out a document, heavy paper with a seal that carried the weight of Washington. "President Grant signed this. It's a commendation, Elias, for you." I took the paper, my hands unsteady. It named me a federal Indian agent for the Southwest Territory, a mediator between the Navajo and the government. It recognized my adoption by Tahoma's people, my role in saving Kael, my part in keeping the peace. "They want you to work with the tribes," Hawkins said. "Expand the treaties, make sure this kind of conspiracy never happens again. But there's a catch. Tahoma has to approve it." As if summoned, hoofbeats echoed across the ranch, not the frantic gallop of men riding for blood, but the steady rhythm of a ceremonial procession. Tahoma rode at the head, 20 Navajo elders behind him, their regalia bright against the dusty plain. Kael was with them, healed now, carrying a second lance, not a war lance, but one carved with symbols of peace, its feathers intertwined with olive branches. Tahoma dismounted, his eyes bright with something I couldn't name. "Kind heart," he said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "We come to speak of your future." The ceremony was like nothing I'd ever seen. The elders formed a circle, each speaking of what I'd done, saving Kael, throwing the lance, choosing honor over safety. Tahoma spoke last, his words heavy with wisdom. 6 months ago you gave water to a stranger. Today you carry the hopes of 2 peoples. This lance," he gestured to the peace lance, "is for a guardian, not a warrior. Accept it, and you become our voice, our shield, our bridge to the white man's world." I took the lance, its carvings cool under my fingers, the word peace etched in both Navajo and English. "I accept," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of it all. The elders nodded, their faces etched with pride and hope. That night, we shared food and stories under the stars, Navajo and settlers together, dreaming of a world where our children could grow up free. 2 years later, the territory was a different place. The treaties had grown, binding 17 Navajo bands, 4 Pueblo communities, and even some Apache clans. Trade routes flourished, schools taught both English and Navajo, and the government passed laws to root out corruption. I split my time between Washington and the Navajo lands, carrying 2 lances, one for war, one for peace. I married a Navajo weaver named Lila, who taught me the beauty of her people's art, and together we raised 2 children who spoke both languages like they were born to it. Amos became Marshall Reed, then Congressman Reed, carrying the lessons of Dead Man's Gorge to the halls of power. The Navajo thrived, their land secure, their voices heard. Every year, I returned to the well where I'd found Kyle, remembering that cup of water, that moment when everything changed. It wasn't the lance or the fight that defined me. It was the choice to care, to act, to believe that one small deed could ripple out and touch a world I'd never imagined.